In this video, we're going to look at the different manuscripts of the somewhat understudied Gospel of the Savior. And you can actually see a picture of the Codex that it comes from, or at least one version of it, over here. So let's jump right in. So let's start by just talking about the basics of the Gospel of the Savior. So this Gospel is an apocryphal text that was discovered in the 1990s, even though its manuscripts have been catalogued in Europe and in other places before then. So this text has also been called the Berlin-Strasbourg Apocryphon because of the location of the manuscripts and because some scholars in recent years have questioned whether it is actually a gospel at all in the same sense as the canonical Gospels. So the three surviving versions of this text include Jesus' discourse with the disciples on the Mount of Olives, and it is complete with a hymn to the cross, and that's actually the distinctive part of this Gospel of the Savior. Okay, so our presentation today includes a survey and an explanation of the details of the three surviving versions of the Gospel of the Savior. So as I said, there are three versions, and these are what they are. We have the Strasbourg Gospel, and we have the Berlin Gospel, and we have the Nubia Gospel. Or at least that's what I'm choosing to call them. Their more official names are in the parentheses, as you can see. And we will treat them in order from the earliest to the latest. So let's start with the Strasbourg Gospel. So this is the oldest of the existing manuscripts. It dates to the 400 CE. And unfortunately, I cannot provide a picture of the Coptic document because I was not able to get my hands on the critical edition with photographs in time. But when I do, I will find a way to post those on the channel. So this manuscript mostly preserves the last quarter of the Gospel of the Savior. So it mostly just covers the last part of it. But some of it does overlap, and it has some identical wording with what is covered in the other text, the Berlin Gospel. However, we must not assume that the similarities of the overlapping content necessarily means that the two documents were originally the same. In the places that are missing, they might have differences. So I tend to think it's better just to treat them as two separate texts, even though they clearly have some kind of common source behind them, it seems. But we don't know what might have been different between them because of the fragmentary nature of the evidence. We don't really have enough manuscripts to compare them with each other and establish whatever the common source might have looked like. Okay, so let's go to the next one, and this is the Berlin Gospel, and this is logged as the Parchment Berlin with the number 22220. So people tend to just call it the Berlin Gospel or something like that, or at least that's what I'm calling it. People will call it by different names, so sometimes it's hard to decide. But in any case, this text is the newer one. I guess I have a typo. Newer than the other one is what I meant to write. But it does preserve about the first 3/4 of the text. So whereas the Strasbourg version has the final quarter, this version, the Berlin Gospel, has the first 3/4, more or less. It's just an estimation. So this particular manuscript dates to the 500s or to the 600s CE. It was also written in Coptic, just like the Strasbourg Gospel, and it is also very much fragmentary. Similarly, I do not have a picture of it, and I can prove it to you. This is the Berlin Papyrus database, and you can see that over to the left here it shows an option for the image, but there is no image available, so I couldn't go and show it to you. But if I get the pictures at some point, I will put them in a separate video when I analyze the text more in greater detail. So now let's go to the one that I find the most interesting, and this would be the Nubia Gospel. And again, that's what I'm choosing to call it, but it's also more officially known as being part of the Qasr el-Wizz Codex, or Wizz Codex. So this version of the text has a very interesting history. It was discovered as part of a larger Coptic codex, and it was discovered when archaeologists were trying to rescue artifacts amid the construction of the Aswan Dam. So it comes from somewhere between 700 CE and 900 CE. So this manuscript has a redacted version of the hymn to the cross that appears in the other versions of the Gospel of the Savior. But it isn't quite the same. It's clearly developed. It's changed a little bit. So scholars imagine that it used the gospel attested in the other two manuscripts as a source for writing its version, or the scribe or the copyist to, change the text a little bit for this version. And I did find a picture of this one at least, so you can at least see a little bit of what we're talking about. So in any case, in conclusion, so even though this is a very new gospel, it has not received as much attention compared to other recent gospels, like the Gospel of Judas. Maybe it wasn't scandalous enough, I don't know. For those of you who know, the Gospel of Judas made quite a stir when it came out in 2006 or so. But some things make the Gospel of the Savior difficult to study because it has a lot of holes in it. That would be one issue, and that does affect scholarly interest and public interest. If the text is harder to deal with, then a lot of people just don't feel like trying to deal with it. Now, I personally find the sections with the hymn to the cross to be fascinating, and we will probably make some more videos about the different versions of this gospel in the future. But until then, I hope you have a nice time.